The sky hung heavy that December afternoon, bruised purple and gray like an old wound that refused to heal. Wyoming stretched out in all directions, endless and unforgiving, a landscape stripped bare by winter's cruel hand. The snow had not yet fallen, but it waited in those clouds, patient as death itself, ready to bury everything beneath its white silence. The cottonwoods stood skeletal against that threatening sky, their branches reaching upward like the arms of drowning men. Fence posts leaned at broken angles across the frozen fields, markers of promises that had crumbled into dust. The wind moved across the open ground with a sound like distant weeping, carrying with it the bitter taste of iron and ice. In the middle of that desolation, she stood. Margaret Brennan, 30 years old and already ancient with suffering, bent beneath the weight of a 50-pound flour sack on her shoulder. The baby strapped to her chest, 8 months old and frighteningly silent, barely moved against her. His name was William, and his breathing came shallow and weak, each small breath a victory against the cold that sought to claim him. Behind her, 5 more children struggled through the snow. Their feet, wrapped in rags that had once been shirts, left small trails of blood on the frozen ground. Thomas, 11 years old, carried an axe that weighed nearly as much as he did. His face had the hard lines of a much older man, eyes that had seen things no child should witness. Catherine, 9, clutched a torn Bible to her chest, her lips moving in silent prayer, or perhaps just habit. The twin boys, James and John, 7 years old, clung to each other as they walked, two halves of a broken whole. Little Patrick, only 3, coughed with a sound like tearing cloth, each spasm shaking his tiny frame. They moved like ghosts across that wasteland, refugees from some war that had left no victors. The house behind them stood as testimony to failure. The cabin Patrick Brennan had built with his own drunken hands leaned to one side. Its roof collapsed on the western corner where he had refused to add support beams. 3 windows gaped empty, their glass long since shattered, now stuffed with quilts that did nothing to keep out the cold. The door hung on a single hinge, swaying gently in the wind like a man on a gallows. Behind the smokehouse, covered now by a thin layer of frost, Patrick Brennan himself lay wrapped in canvas. He had been there for 32 days. Margaret had dragged his body there herself, pulled it across the frozen ground by his boots, leaving a trail through the dirt that looked like something wounded had crawled away to die. She had meant to bury him, had wanted to give him that much, at least. But the ground had frozen solid 2 weeks before his death, hard as iron, and her children needed food more than their father needed a grave. So he waited there, stiff and still, while life went on without him. Margaret straightened slowly, feeling her spine pop like kindling. She was not old, but her body had forgotten youth. 30 years felt like 60. Every movement brought pain, every breath a reminder of the beatings that had left their mark on ribs that never quite healed right. Her hands, cracked and bleeding from the cold, gripped the flour sack tighter. This was all they had left: 20 pounds of flour, a jar of lard, and the clothes on their backs. Everything else had been sold or stolen or simply abandoned. She looked at her children, saw the way Thomas tried to stand tall despite his trembling legs, saw Catherine's lips turning blue, saw the twins huddled together for warmth, saw little Patrick's eyes glazed with fever. She looked down at baby William, pressed against her chest, and felt his heart beating faint and fast like a bird trapped in cupped hands. And something inside her, some last reserve of strength she did not know she possessed, simply gave way. The flour sack fell from her shoulder, landing in the snow with a soft thump that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Margaret sank to her knees, then forward onto her hands, her breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the crushing weight of hopelessness. She did not cry. She had no tears left. Had not cried since the day she realized Patrick would never change, would never stop drinking, would never stop using his fist to solve problems that existed only in his whiskey-soaked mind. She had not cried when he fell from the barn roof, had not cried when she found him lying in the mud with his skull split open like rotten fruit, had not cried through any of it. But now, kneeling in the snow with her children watching, she simply could not stand up again. Thomas dropped the axe and ran to her, his small hands pulling at her shoulders. "Ma," he said, his voice cracking with fear he tried to hide. "Ma, we gotta move. It is getting dark. We cannot stay here." Margaret raised her head, looked at her son, saw in his eyes the same exhaustion she felt, the same bone-deep weariness of someone who has been fighting too long against odds that cannot be beaten. But she also saw something else: determination, hope, the stubborn refusal to surrender that she had somehow managed to plant in him despite everything. "I know, baby," she whispered. "I know, but I just need a minute, just 1 minute to rest." "We do not have a minute," Thomas said, and there was anger in his voice now, anger born of terror. "The storm is coming. You said so yourself. We have to get to town before it hits or we will die out here." He was right. She knew he was right. But her body would not obey, would not rise, would not take another step. Behind them, the wind picked up, colder now, carrying the first tiny crystals of ice that stung exposed skin like thrown sand. The sky darkened another shade, deepening from ashen gray to pitch black. In another hour, perhaps less, the storm would be upon them, and they were still 2 miles from Thunder Ridge, 2 miles across open ground with no shelter, no protection, nothing but the thin clothes on their backs and a mother who could no longer stand. Thomas looked around desperately, as if salvation might appear from the empty landscape. His hand found the axe again, lifted it, ready to fight whatever came. Catherine moved closer, gathering the younger children around her, creating a small huddle of warmth and terror. They all waited, watched, hoped for something that they knew in their hearts would not come. Help did not find people like them. People like them died alone in the snow, while the world moved on, uncaring. But on a ridge 2 miles north, a man on horseback saw them. Jacob Hartford, who most folks call Cole, sat astride a gray mare that had carried him through worse storms than this. He was 36 years old, built lean and hard from a life that had been neither easy nor kind. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent too many years under an unforgiving sun, and his eyes carried the weight of losses that could not be spoken aloud. He had been returning from Thunder Ridge, saddlebags full of grain for his livestock, when he saw them. At first, they were just dark shapes against the white ground, barely distinguishable from rocks or fallen timber. But then one of the shapes moved, and Cole saw what they were. A woman, 6 children, alone on the frozen plain with night coming fast. His first instinct was to keep riding. It was not callousness that made him think this, but experience. He had tried to help before, had stopped for people who claimed to need assistance only to be cursed at, spat upon, told to mind his own business by men who saw charity as insult. He had learned slowly and painfully that sometimes people would rather die proud than live helped. But something made him stop, made him turn the mare around and look again. The woman was on her knees now. She had fallen and she was not getting up. The children clustered around her, and even from this distance, Cole could see their fear, could see the way the oldest boy held an axe like a weapon, ready to defend against threats he could not possibly fight. Cole closed his eyes and saw another woman, saw Emma, his wife, lying in bed with their son beside her. Both dead, both gone 3 years now, claimed by diphtheria while he had been 200 miles away, driving cattle to market, earning money to buy medicine they never got to take. He remembered arriving home to find them already buried, 2 rough wooden crosses marking the place where his whole life had ended. The neighbors had said they thought he would come back sooner, had not sent word because they assumed he would just know somehow that his family needed him. He had not known, and they had deeds alone. Cole opened his eyes and looked at the woman and her children. He could ride past, could tell himself it was not his concern, not his responsibility, could justify it in a dozen different ways. Or he could stop, could help, could make sure that whatever happened, these people would not die alone on the frozen ground, while someone who could have helped simply rode away. He turned the mare down the slope toward them. Thomas saw him first, saw the rider coming down from the ridge, and immediately moved to place himself between his mother and the stranger. He raised the axe with hands that shook from cold and fear, but his voice when he spoke was steady. "Stay back, mister. Do not touch my ma." Cole reined in the mare about 20 feet away and raised both hands, palms out, showing he had carried no weapon. "Easy, son," he said, his voice low and calm. "I am not here to hurt nobody." Margaret lifted her head and looked at the stranger. She saw a man past his youth but not yet old, wearing a thick coat that had been patched many times but was clean and whole. His hat was pulled low against the wind, but she could see his eyes, and they were not the eyes of someone looking for trouble. They were tired eyes, sad eyes, eyes that had seen too much loss. But she had learned not to trust. Patrick had taught her that, had taught her that men who seemed kind could turn cruel in an instant, that soft words could hide hard fists, that promises meant nothing. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice rough from cold and disuse. Cole dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "Ma'am," he said, "you need help." "We do not need nothing from strangers," Margaret said, forcing herself to her feet. She swayed, caught herself, stood as straight as her broken body would allow. Cole looked at her, at the children, at the baby strapped to her chest who had not made a sound. He looked at the boy with the axe, at the little ones whose lips were turning blue. "At the tracks of blood in the snow, ain't it offering charity," he said quietly. "Just a ride to wherever you are going. Storm is coming. You won't make it through the night out here." "We will manage," Margaret said, but even she could hear the hollow lie in those words. Cole was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm. "No, ma'am, you will not, and those children deserve better than freezing to death because you are too proud to accept help." The words hit harder than any blow Patrick had ever landed. Margaret felt something crack inside her, felt the armor she had built around herself begin to crumble. She looked at her children, saw Thomas standing there with the axe, trying so hard to be the man of the family at 11 years old, saw Catherine with tears frozen on her cheeks, saw the twins huddled together, saw little Patrick swaying on his feet, saw baby William's chest barely rising and falling. Thomas lowered the axe. "Ma," he said softly, "he is right. We are not going to make it." Margaret closed her eyes. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Where are you taking us?" she asked. "My place," Cole said. 2 miles north. Got a fire, got food, got beds." Margaret opened her eyes and looked at him directly. "And what do you want in return?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Cole had known it was coming, had known that someone who had suffered as she clearly had would not believe in kindness without cost. "Nothing, ma'am," he said simply. "Lost my wife and boy 3 years back. Know what it is like to be alone. Ain't asking you to trust me. Just asking you to let me help." Margaret studied his face, searching for the lie, for the hidden meaning, for the trap she knew must be there. But she found none. Found only exhaustion that matched her own, grief that mirrored her private pain, and something else, something that looked almost like longing. "You got a wagon?" she asked finally. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret looked at Thomas. "Go with him," she said. "Make sure he has got what he says he has. If anything looks wrong, you run back here." Thomas hesitated, not wanting to leave his mother, but understanding the wisdom of her caution. He looked at the stranger, at this man called Cole, and made a decision that would change everything. "All right," he said. "Let us go get that wagon." Cole nodded once, then swung back into the saddle. He offered his hand to Thomas, pulled the boy up behind him. As they rode away toward the ridge, Margaret watched them go, her heart pounding with fear and something that might have been hope. Catherine moved beside her mother, slipping a small hand into Margaret's. "Is he good, Ma?" she asked in a whisper. "I do not know, baby," Margaret said honestly, "but he is all we got." They waited in the gathering darkness as the first snow began to fall. Small flakes at first, drifting down like ash from some distant fire. Within minutes, the flakes grew larger, falling faster, and Margaret knew Thomas had been right. They would not have made it to town, would have died out here in the snow, another nameless tragedy in a land full of them. She pulled the children close, wrapping them in what little warmth her body could provide, and prayed to a God she was no longer sure listened. Nearly an hour passed, each minute stretching like an eternity. The snow fell heavier now, and visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. Margaret began to fear that Cole had simply left them, had taken Thomas and disappeared, that this had all been some cruel game. But then she heard it. The creak of wagon wheels, the snort of horses, the jingle of harness. And through the snow, like a ghost ship emerging from fog, came a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. Thomas sat on the bench beside Cole, and when the boy saw his mother, his face broke into the first real smile Margaret had seen in months. "He has got it all, Ma," Thomas called out. Fire and food and everything. It is going to be all right. Cole brought the wagon to a stop beside them. The bed was lined with thick straw and wool blankets, and Margaret could see that he had prepared it carefully, had taken time to make it as comfortable as possible. He climbed down and began helping the children into the back, his movements gentle and practiced, as if he had done this before. Margaret handed him baby William, watched as Cole cradled the infant with surprising tenderness. The man looked down at the child, and something passed across his face. Pain, loss, memory. Then he carefully wrapped William in a clean blanket and handed him back. "We will get him warm," Cole said. "Got soup on the stove and the fire going strong. He will be all right." Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Cole helped her onto the bench beside him, then climbed up himself. With a soft click of his tongue, he set the horses moving north through the deepening snow. They rode in silence at first. The wagon creaked and swayed over the frozen ground, but the horses were sure-footed and strong. In the back, the children huddled together under the blankets, and within minutes, Margaret heard the soft sounds of sleep. They had been running on terror and adrenaline for so long at the moment they felt even slightly safe, exhaustion claimed them. Cole drove with easy confidence, his hands steady on the reins. He knew this land, knew every ridge and hollow, could probably have found his way home blind. After nearly 30 minutes of silence, he spoke. "Name is Jacob Hartford. Folks call me Cole." Margaret did not look at him. "Margaret, Maggie, you got family out this way?" "No, buried back in Kansas." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Your husband?" Maggie's jaw tightened. "Dead. 1 month. I'm sorry. Don't be. I am not." The words hung between them, raw and honest. Cole understood what she was not saying, understood the story written in her bruises and broken bones. He had seen it before. Had watched his own mother wear similar marks until his father finally drank himself to death when Cole was 16. "How did he die?" Cole asked softly. Maggie hesitated, then decided this stranger had earned at least the truth. "Built the barn wrong, climbed too high, rafter gave." She paused. "He was drunk, always was." Cole nodded, said nothing more. Sometimes silence was the only appropriate response. The storm intensified as they traveled, the snow now falling so thick that Cole could barely see the horses' heads. But he kept the team moving steadily north, following landmarks only he could see, trusting in memory and instinct. Beside him, Maggie held William close, rocking the baby gently, humming a tune so quietly Cole almost could not hear it. After another hour, Cole pointed ahead. "There," he said, "home." Through the curtain of snow, Maggie saw lights, warm golden lights shining from windows like beacons. As they drew closer, the house took shape. It was not large, but it was solid. A proper cabin made of thick logs, with a stone chimney from which smoke rose in a steady stream. A barn stood behind it, and even in the storm, Maggie could see that everything was well maintained, carefully tended. Cole drove the wagon right up to the front porch, which was covered and protected from the snow. He climbed down and began lifting the children from the back, carrying them one by one into the house. Thomas went first, still carrying the axe, his eyes wide, as he took in this place that seemed almost too good to be real. Finally, Cole returned for Maggie. He offered his hand to help him on, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was strong but careful, and he steadied her when she stumbled on legs that had gone numb from the cold. "Welcome to Hartford Ranch," he said simply, and led her inside. The warmth hit her like a physical force. Maggie stood just inside the door, unable to move, barely able to breathe. The cabin was clean and organized, with a large stone fireplace along one wall where a fire burned hot and bright. The furniture was simple but well made, obviously crafted by hand. A table dominated the center of the room, large enough to seat 8. 2 doors led to what Maggie assumed were bedrooms. Along one wall hung a rifle, old but well maintained. Beside it was a framed photograph of a man in Union Army uniform, young and proud. Maggie recognized Cole in that face, though decades younger and not yet marked by loss. Cole moved to the fireplace where a large pot hung over the flames. The smell of stew filled the room, rich and savory, and Maggie felt her stomach clench with hunger so intense it hurt. "That is venison," Cole said, ladling the stew into bowls. "Not fresh, but hot." He handed the first bowl to Thomas. "Eat slow. Do not want you getting sick." But Thomas could not eat slow. None of them could. They had been hungry for too long. They attacked the food like wolves, barely chewing, shoveling it into their mouths with shaking hands. Cole watched, saying nothing, just kept filling bowls until finally they slowed down, their bellies full for the first time in weeks. Maggie was the last to eat. She sat by the fire with William in her arms, unwrapping the baby's thin blankets, checking his tiny body for frostbite. His fingers and toes were red, but not black, and when she held him close to the warmth, he stirred and let out a small cry. "That is a good sign," Cole said quietly. "Means he has got fight left in him." Maggie looked up at him and for the first time really looked, saw the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the scars on his knuckles. Saw a man who had known hard work and harder loss, a man who understood suffering because he had lived it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Cole was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Told you. Lost my family. Emma and our boy, Jacob Jr. Diphtheria 3 years back. I was gone, working a cattle drive in Montana. By the time I got back, he stopped, swallowed hard. They had been dead 2 weeks. Buried without me, without anyone to say proper words over them." Maggie saw the pain in his face, saw how much that admission had cost him. "I am sorry," she said. Cole shook his head. "Point is, they died alone. My wife and my son, they died alone because I was not there. And I cannot," he looked at her directly now, "I cannot ever let that happen to someone else if I can help it." Understanding passed between them in that moment. Two people who had been broken by different kinds of loss, finding themselves on the same frozen ground, reaching for the same fragile hope. "You do not owe me nothing," Cole said. "You can stay as long as you need. Got food enough for winter, got room." "That bedroom there," he pointed to one of the doors, "was mine and Emma's. You and the young'uns take it. I will sleep out here by the fire." Maggie opened her mouth to protest, but Cole raised a hand. "Ain't negotiable," he said simply. "You need rest. All of you. We will figure out the rest tomorrow." He stood and moved toward the bedroom, opening the door to reveal a large bed covered in thick quilts. The room was clean and spare, with only a dresser and a small table beside the bed. On the dresser sat a photograph frame, face down. "Get some sleep," Cole said. "I will keep the fire going." Maggie gathered her children, herded them toward the bedroom. They moved like sleepwalkers now, exhausted beyond measure. Thomas was the last to go in, pausing at the door to look back at Cole. "Thank you, Greeter," the boy said quietly. Cole nodded. "You are a good son," he said. "Your ma is lucky to have you." Something passed between them in that exchange, some understanding that transcended words. Then Thomas went into the bedroom and closed the door. Cole stood alone in the main room, listening to the storm rage outside, feeling the warmth of the fire on his face. He looked at the photograph on the wall, the young soldier who had believed the war would make him a hero, who had come home to build a life only to watch it crumble. Then he sat down in the chair by the fire and began his vigil, keeping watch over this unexpected family that had stumbled into his life like refugees from someone else's war. In the bedroom, Maggie lay down on the bed with her children clustered around her. The mattress was soft, the quilts heavy and warm. Catherine pressed close on one side, the twins on the other. Thomas lay at the foot of the bed, still alert, still on guard. Little Patrick curled into a tight ball, his coughing finally quieting. Baby William slept against Maggie's chest, his breathing deeper now, stronger. Maggie closed her eyes and waited for sleep. But instead of darkness, she found herself staring at the ceiling, unable to stop thinking. She had been running for so long, fighting for so long, that she had forgotten what it felt like to stop, to rest, to be safe. Tears came then, silent and hot, streaming down her face to soak into the pillow. She cried for her lost years, for her children's stolen childhood, for the woman she had been before Patrick Brennan destroyed her piece by piece. She cried for the life she should have had and the one she had gotten instead. But beneath the grief there was something else, something small and fragile and almost forgotten. Hope. In the main room, Cole sat by the fire and remembered Emma, remembered the way she laughed, the way she sang while she worked, the way she had looked at him on their wedding day like he was something precious and rare. He remembered his son, Jacob Jr., who had been 4 years old when he died, who had loved horses and stories and the sound of rain on the roof. He had not been there, had been 200 miles away, earning money to buy land, to build a future while his actual future slipped away in a sick room where no one even thought to send him word. The guilt of that would never leave him. But perhaps, he thought, perhaps there was a way to balance the scales, not to erase what had been lost, but to honor it by making sure others did not suffer the same fate. He stood and walked to the bedroom door, listened to the soft sounds of sleep from within. Then he moved to his workbench in the corner and found a piece of wood, a knife, and began to carve. His hands worked automatically, muscle memory guiding the blade. He carved a simple toy, a horse rough-hewn but recognizable. It was something for the children, something to let them know they were welcome here. The storm continued to howl outside, but inside the cabin was warm and safe and quiet. And for the first time in 3 years, Jacob Hartford felt something like peace. Morning came late and gray, the sun hidden behind clouds that showed no sign of breaking. Cole woke from his chair by the fire, his neck stiff and his back aching, and immediately checked the hearth. The fire had burned low but not out. He added wood, stirred the coals back to life, then put coffee on to boil. He was standing by the stove when the bedroom door opened and Thomas emerged, the axe still in his hand. The boy looked around warily, as if expecting the warmth and safety of the night before to have been a dream. "Morning," Cole said quietly. "Morning, sir," Thomas replied, his voice cautious. Cole poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Thomas. The boy looked surprised, but took it, sipped carefully at the bitter brew. "Your ma and the young'uns still sleeping?" "Yes, sir." "Good, they need it." Cole moved to the counter, began pulling out ingredients for breakfast. "You know how to make biscuits?" "No, sir." "Come here, I will show you." Thomas set down his axe for the first time since entering the cabin and moved to stand beside Cole. Together they mixed flour and lard and salt, working the dough until it came together. Cole's hands moved with practiced efficiency, but he went slowly, letting Thomas see each step. "My ma taught me this," Cole said as he worked. "Said a man who cannot feed himself is only half a man." Thomas watched intently, his young face serious. "Can I try?" Cole stepped back, let the boy take over. Thomas's hands were clumsy at first, but he learned quickly, adapting his grip, finding the rhythm. By the time the biscuits went into the oven, he was smiling, and it transformed his face from that of a worried old man into the child he actually was. They worked together in companionable silence, frying bacon and eggs, setting the table. When the bedroom door opened again and Maggie emerged with Catherine holding her hand, the table was laden with more food than the family had seen in months. Maggie stopped in the doorway, staring at the scene before her, her son working side by side with a stranger, both of them moving with easy coordination. The table set with real plates and real silverware and real food, steaming and hot and abundant. "Ma," Thomas said, turning with a grin, "I made biscuits." And just like that, something inside Maggie broke open. Not shattered, but opened, like a door that had been locked for too long, finally swinging wide. She felt it physically, felt the armor she had built around her heart crack and fall away. She walked to the table and sat down, and for the second time in 12 hours, she cried. But these tears were different. These were not tears of grief or pain or exhaustion. These were tears of relief so profound it hurt. Tears of gratitude so overwhelming she could not contain it. Cole said nothing, just filled a plate and set it in front of her. Then he gathered the other children, got them settled at the table, made sure everyone had food and milk and everything they needed. They ate in silence at first, but gradually, tentatively, the children began to speak. Catherine told a story about a rabbit she had seen before the snow came. The twins, James and John, argued good-naturedly about who could eat more biscuits. Little Patrick giggled at something only he understood. Baby William, propped in Maggie's lap, watched everything with wide eyes and reached for the light streaming through the window. And Maggie, watching her children come back to life, felt something she had not felt in years. She felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. After breakfast, Cole took Thomas out to the barn to show him how to care for the livestock. Maggie watched them go, saw the way her son stood a little taller, walked a little prouder. Then she turned to the task of cleaning up and found that Catherine had already started, was already stacking plates and wiping down the table. Together, mother and daughter worked in comfortable silence, and Maggie realized this was the first time in months she had done simple housework without fear, Without waiting for Patrick to come home drunk and angry, without bracing for the blow that would inevitably come. She was free. The thought struck her with such force that she had to steady herself against the counter. Free. After so many years of prison, she was finally free. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the world lay quiet and white under a blanket that covered all the ugliness beneath. Inside, flames danced steadily in the hearth, and for the first time since she could remember, Margaret Brennan allowed herself to hope that winter might not last forever. 2 weeks passed like water finding its level, each day settling into a rhythm that felt both strange and inevitable. The storm that had brought them together gave way to brittle, cold sunshine, the kind of light that made the snow sparkle like broken glass but offered no warmth. The thermometer outside Cole's window read 15 below zero most mornings, and the world seemed locked in ice, waiting for some distant spring that might never come. But inside the Hartford cabin, something was thawing. Maggie woke each morning before dawn, as she always had, but now she woke to the sound of Cole already moving about, stoking the fire, putting coffee on to boil. The first few days, she had rushed to take over these tasks, uncomfortable with being cared for, unused to a man who did not expect to be served. But Cole had simply handed her a cup of coffee and gestured for her to sit. "You carried them this far alone," he had said quietly. "Let someone help carry for a while." So she sat, and she watched, and slowly, carefully, she began to let go of the constant vigilance that had kept her alive, but had also been killing her by inches. Thomas thrived under Cole's quiet instruction. Every morning after breakfast, the boy would follow Cole out to the barn, and together they would care for the horses and cattle. Cole taught him how to check hooves for cracks, how to measure grain, how to read the animals for signs of illness or distress. He taught him with patience that Thomas had never known, correcting mistakes without anger, praising small successes without condescension. One morning, as Maggie watched from the window, she saw Cole show Thomas how to properly swing a hammer, how to let the weight of the tool do the work rather than forcing it. Thomas's first attempts were clumsy, the nails bending, but Cole simply pulled them out and handed him new ones. "Again," she heard him say, "you will get it, just takes practice." And Thomas did get it. By the end of the week, he was driving nails straight and true, and the pride on his face was something Maggie had not seen since he was very small, before Patrick's drinking had turned their home into a battlefield. Catherine found her own place in this new life. She helped Maggie with the cooking and the younger children, but she also spent hours reading by the fire. Cole had a small collection of books, nothing fancy, but to Catherine, who had owned exactly one book in her entire life, it was a treasure beyond measure. She read almanacs and old newspapers and a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe that Cole said had been his father's. The girl would read passages aloud to her younger siblings, her voice gaining confidence with each page. Cole would listen from his workbench, where he spent his evenings carving and repairing tools, and occasionally he would add a comment or ask a question that showed he was paying attention. The twins, James and John, followed Cole everywhere he would let them, two small shadows mimicking his every move. They learned to stack firewood the way he did, to check the weather by the way the smoke rose from the chimney, to read tracks in the snow. Cole treated them with the same respect he showed Thomas, never dismissing them as too young or too small. Little Patrick's cough gradually faded under the influence of warm food and dry air. His fever broke on the third day, and by the end of the first week, he was running around the cabin with an energy that would have been worrying if it had not been so obviously healthy. He attached himself to Cole with the blind faith of a child who has found safety after terror, and Cole accepted this devotion with a gentleness that made Maggie's throat tight. Baby William grew stronger each day. His color improved, his appetite returned, and he began to make the normal sounds of a healthy infant, cooing and babbling, and occasionally shrieking with delight at nothing in particular. When Cole held him, which he did often, the baby would grab at his beard and laugh, and Cole would smile in a way that transformed his weathered face into something almost young. And Maggie watched it all, this careful construction of something that looked almost like a family, and felt her defenses crumbling day by day. She found small kindnesses everywhere. The boots that appeared by her bed one morning, worn but serviceable, that fit almost perfectly. The way Cole always served the children first at meals, making sure they had full plates before taking anything for himself. The patience he showed when little Patrick spilled his milk or when the twins tracked mud across the clean floor. One evening, as she was mending clothes by the fire, she found a needle case on the table beside her, made of soft leather and filled with needles of various sizes. She had mentioned only once that her old needles were bent and dull. Cole was at his workbench, apparently absorbed in sharpening a saw. She held up the needle case. "Did you make this?" He glanced over, shrugged. "Had some scrap leather. Figured you could use it." "Thank you," she said, and meant it for more than just the needles. He met her eyes for a moment, nodded, then went back to his work. But Maggie saw the faint color on his cheeks, saw the way his hands moved a little less steadily for a moment, and understood that her gratitude mattered to him. The days found their pattern. Morning chores, breakfast together, the men outside while Maggie and Catherine managed the house and the younger children. Midday meal, more work, then evening when they would all gather around the fire. Sometimes Catherine would read aloud. Sometimes Cole would tell stories about his time in the war, carefully edited for young ears but still thrilling. Sometimes they would simply sit in companionable silence, comfortable with each other's presence. But beneath this domestic peace, Maggie felt the weight of unspoken questions. What was this arrangement, exactly? How long could it last? What did Cole expect in return, and what would happen when he finally asked for payment? The answers came on a cold afternoon during the third week, but not in any way Maggie had anticipated. Cole had taken Thomas into town for supplies, leaving Maggie alone with the younger children. She was kneading bread dough when she heard a sound from the barn, a crash followed by distressed lowing from the cattle. She wiped her hands and went to investigate. One of the cows had knocked over a bucket and gotten its head stuck in the stall railing. The animal was panicking, pulling and thrashing, and Maggie could see blood on its neck where the wood was cutting into flesh. She moved without thinking, the way she had learned to move around panicked livestock, speaking soft and low as she approached. "Easy, girl, easy now. We will get you out. Just stay calm." The cow did not stay calm. It lunged sideways, and Maggie had to jump back to avoid being crushed against the wall. She tried again, got closer this time, managed to get her hands on the railing. The wood was old and had cracked under the cow's weight. If she could just pry it open a few more inches, the animal could pull free. She braced her feet and pulled with all her strength. The wood shifted, groaned, gave way another inch. The cow sensed freedom and lunged again, and this time the railing snapped completely. The cow pulled free, bellowing, and the broken board swung around and caught Maggie across the shoulder, sending her sprawling into the straw. She lay there for a moment, stunned, pain radiating from her shoulder down her arm. When she tried to sit up, the world spun and she had to stop, breathing hard, waiting for the dizziness to pass. That was how Cole found her 10 minutes later, sitting in the straw with blood on her shirt from a gash on her shoulder, looking pale and shaken, but furious at her own weakness. "What happened?" he said, dropping to his knees beside her. It was not a question. "Cow got stuck," Maggie said through gritted teeth. "Had to get her free." "I am fine. You are bleeding. It is just a scratch." Cole carefully pulled back the torn fabric of her shirt to examine the wound. It was not just a scratch. The broken board had gouged a 3-inch gash across her shoulder blade, deep enough to need stitches. But what stopped Cole was not the fresh wound. It was the old scars. They covered her back like a map of suffering. Long welts from a belt, round burns that could only have come from cigarettes, the puckered marks of wounds that had healed badly because they had never been properly treated. Some were old and faded to white lines. Others were more recent, still pink and raised. Cole's hand stilled. His breathing changed. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. "He did this." It was not a question, but Maggie answered anyway. "Yes." "How long?" "Years, since Thomas was a baby." Cole was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, very carefully, very deliberately, and walked out of the barn. Maggie heard him take several deep breaths, heard what might have been a curse or might have been a prayer. When he came back, his face was composed, but his eyes were burning. "Come inside," he said. "Let me clean that properly." In the cabin, with the children occupied in the bedroom, Cole had Maggie sit at the table while he heated water and gathered clean cloth. His movements were precise and controlled, but Maggie could feel the tension radiating from him. He cleaned the wound with gentle hands, stitched it with steady fingers, bound it with clean bandages. The whole time, he did not speak. When he was finished, he sat back and finally looked at her. "Why did you stay?" he asked. Maggie had been asked this question before, by neighbors who whispered behind her back, by the doctor in town who had set her broken arm and known exactly how it had been broken. She had never answered honestly. But sitting here in Cole's warm kitchen, seeing the genuine pain and anger in his eyes, anger that was for her and not at her, she found herself telling the truth. Because I had nowhere else to go. Because he said he would take the children if I left. Because the law does not care about women who cannot afford lawyers. Because I was scared. Because I was ashamed. Because by the time I realized how bad it was going to get, I was already trapped. She paused, then added quietly, and because part of me believed him when he said it was my fault, that I made him angry, that if I was just better, quieter, more obedient, he would stop. Cole's jaw clenched. It was not your fault. None of it. A man who raises his hand to a woman is not a man at all. I know that now, Maggie said, but knowing it and believing it are different things. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Cole stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "The day Emma died," he said quietly, "I was 3 weeks away from home. We needed money, and there was a cattle drive heading to Omaha. Good pay. She told me to go, said she and Jacob Jr. would be fine. I believed her." He paused, his hand gripping the window frame. "When I got home, they had been dead for 2 weeks. Cholera had swept through the area, killed a dozen people. The neighbors buried Emma and my boy in the plot behind the house, put up wooden crosses. Thought I would be back in time, and when I was not, figured I would want them buried proper anyway." Maggie waited, knowing there was more. "I spent 3 years hating myself for not being there," Cole continued. 3 years thinking if I had just stayed home, maybe I could have saved them. Maybe I could have done something. But I know now that is not how disease works. I know I probably would have just died with them." He turned to face her. "But you, Maggie, you stayed. You stayed and you took the beatings, and you protected those children the only way you knew how. You survived when a lot of women would not have, when a lot of women would have given up, and you got them out. When the chance came, you took it, and you got them to safety." Maggie felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I did not get them to safety," she said. "You did. If you had not come along, we would have died in that snow." "Maybe," Cole said, "or maybe you would have made it to town on pure stubbornness. Either way, you are here now, and those children are alive because you refused to give up." He moved back to the table, sat down across from her. "What I am trying to say is you do not owe me nothing. Not gratitude, not service, not anything. You and your young'uns are welcome here as long as you want to stay. No strings, no expectations. Just a safe place until you figure out what comes next." Maggie looked at this man, this stranger who had become something more, and felt the last of her walls crumble. "What if I want to stay?" she asked quietly. Cole's breath caught. "Then you stay. What if the children get attached? They already are. What if I get attached?" Cole reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid and real. "Then I would be honored," he said simply. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, something unspoken but deeply felt passing between them. Then the bedroom door burst open and little Patrick came running out, shrieking with laughter as the twins chased him. And the moment shattered into everyday chaos. But it did not disappear. It settled into the foundation of whatever was being built between them, becoming part of the structure. That night, after the children were asleep, Maggie came out of the bedroom to find Cole sitting by the fire, working on the small wooden horse he had been carving. She sat down in the chair across from him. "Tell me about her," she said. "About Emma." Cole's hands stilled on the carving. Then slowly he began to speak. He told her about meeting Emma at a church social, about the way she laughed like bells ringing, about their wedding, small and simple because neither of them had much money, about the joy of discovering she was pregnant and the terror of labor, and the overwhelming relief when both mother and baby survived. He told her about Jacob Jr. learning to walk, to talk, to ride a horse, about the way the boy would follow him everywhere, asking 1,000 questions a day, about Emma's patience with their son, her creativity in making games from nothing, her strength in hard times. And he told her about coming home to find them gone, about the crosses in the yard, about the way the house had felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of furniture. When he finished, his eyes were wet, but he was not crying. Maggie reached over and took the wooden horse from his hands, examined it in the firelight. It was beautiful, each detail carefully carved, obviously a labor of love. "Is this for one of my children?" she asked. Cole nodded. "Thought little Patrick might like it. Seems to love horses. He will treasure it," Maggie said, and handed it back. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Maggie spoke again. "Patrick was not always bad," she said. "When I met him, he was charming, handsome, said all the right things. I was 18 and alone, and he seemed like everything I had ever wanted." She stared into the fire. "The drinking started maybe 6 months after we married. Just a little at first, then more. And when he drank, he changed. Became someone I did not recognize. Someone mean. The first time he hit me, he cried after. Swore it would never happen again. And I believed him." "How many times did he promise that?" Cole asked quietly. "Too many to count. After a while, he stopped promising. Just did it and expected me to accept it. And you stayed. And I stayed. Because where would I go? My parents were dead. I had no money, no skills except teaching, and no school would hire a woman with a drunk husband and a growing family. So I stayed and I tried to make the best of it, and I told myself it was for the children." She turned to look at Cole. "I do not regret leaving. I do not regret that he is dead. Does that make me evil?" Cole shook his head slowly. "Makes you human. Makes you free." Maggie nodded, feeling something release in her chest. Some knot of guilt she had been carrying for so long, she had forgotten it was there. They talked until the fire burned low, sharing stories, sharing pain, sharing the tentative beginnings of hope. And when Maggie finally rose to go to bed, Cole stood as well. "Maggie," he said as she reached the bedroom door. She turned. "I am glad you stayed, all of you. This house has been too quiet for too long." Maggie smiled, really smiled, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I am glad we stayed too." For a brief moment, standing in the warm kitchen with this man who had become so much more than a stranger, Maggie allowed herself to believe that perhaps the worst was behind them, that perhaps finally they had found peace. She would learn the next morning how wrong she was. The next morning brought news from town. Cole and Thomas had gone in for supplies again, and when they returned, Cole's face was grim. He waited until after lunch, when the younger children were napping, before he spoke. "Got a letter at the post office," he said, setting an envelope on the table in front of Maggie. "It is addressed to you. Came from Kansas City." Maggie looked at the envelope as if it were a snake. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her hand shook as she picked it up, broke the seal, pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. She read it in silence, her face growing paler with each line. When she finished, she set it down carefully, as if it might explode. "What is it?" Cole asked. Maggie swallowed hard. "My brother, Silas. He is coming here." Cole picked up the letter and read it. His expression darkened with every sentence. When he looked up, his eyes were hard. "He wants the children." Maggie nodded. "My father died last year. Left me 320 acres in Kansas. I did not know. Patrick never told me. But there is something on that land. Silver, maybe, or gold. Something valuable. The will says if I am found to be an unfit mother, guardianship of the children and control of the land passes to Silas." Cole set the letter down. "So this is not about the children at all." "No, it is about money. It is always about money with Silas." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Cole, he will take them. He has lawyers. He has money. He can prove I abandoned my home, that I have been living with a man who is not my husband. The law will side with him." Cole was silent for a long moment, his mind working. Then he looked at Maggie with an intensity that took her breath away. "Not if you marry me." "What?" "Under the Homestead Act and Wyoming territorial law, a married woman's children belong to her husband. Silas would have no claim if they were legally mine." Maggie stared at him. "Cole, you cannot. I will not ask you to." "You are not asking. I am offering." He moved closer, took her hands in his. Maggie, these past 3 weeks have been, he struggled for words. They have been the best weeks I have had in 3 years. This house feels like a home again. Those children have given me purpose. Thomas is like the son I lost. And you? He stopped, took a breath. You have made me remember what it is like to not be alone, to have someone to talk to share the day with, to just be with. I am not asking because I pity you. I am asking because I want to. Because I would be honored to stand beside you, to protect you and those children, to build something together. Maggie's tears spilled over. But you do not love me. Cole wiped her tears with his thumb, gentle and sure. Maybe not yet, but I respect you. I admire you. I care about what happens to you and those youngins. And I think, given time, love could grow. The kind of love built on trust and respect and shared work. The kind that lasts. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. This was my mother's. She wore it for 40 years. She and my father were not perfect, but they built a life together, raised 5 children, survived drought and war and hardship. This ring is all I have left of her, and I would be proud if you wore it. Maggie looked at the ring, then at Cole's face, seeing the sincerity there, the hope, the vulnerability. She thought about Patrick's ring, cheap tin that had turned her finger green, thought about the promises Patrick had made and broken, thought about the life she had endured and the one being offered now. This was not a fairy tale. Cole was not promising passionate love or easy happiness. He was offering partnership, respect, safety, a chance to build something real. Yes, she said quietly, I will marry you. Cole's face transformed, relief and joy flooding his features. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then very gently he pulled her into an embrace. Maggie stiffened at first, old instincts screaming danger. But Cole did not tighten his grip, did not force her closer. He simply held her, steady and warm, giving her time to adjust, to accept, to understand that this touch meant safety, not harm. Slowly, Maggie relaxed, let herself lean against his chest, let herself feel protected instead of trapped. And when she finally wrapped her arms around him in return, she felt something she had thought was dead inside her begin to stir. Hope, real, tangible hope for a future that did not involve fear. They stood like that for a long time. 2 broken people finding strength in each other, building the foundation of something that might, with care and time, become love. From the bedroom doorway, unnoticed by either adult, Thomas watched with wide eyes. He saw his mother in another man's arms and felt no fear, only fierce relief. Whatever this was, whatever was happening, it was good. He could feel it. He slipped back into the bedroom and closed the door quietly, leaving the adults to their moment. 2 days later, they stood in the small church in Thunder Ridge before Pastor Ezekiel Stone. Maggie wore her only good dress, the blue one that had been patched so many times it was more patches than original fabric. Cole wore his best shirt and the vest from his Army uniform, brushed clean and pressed. The children stood as witnesses, along with Mrs. Abigail Cooper from the general store, Doc Henry Morrison, and Sheriff Tom Dalton. The church was cold, the pews nearly empty, but none of that mattered. Pastor Stone was a spare man with kind eyes who had seen enough of life to understand that not all marriages began with romance. He asked the required questions, received the required answers, and pronounced them man and wife with genuine warmth in his voice. You may kiss the bride, he said. Cole leaned in and kissed Maggie's forehead, gentle and respectful. It was not passionate, but it was real, and it meant more than any grand gesture could have. As they turned to face the handful of witnesses, applause broke out. Mrs. Cooper was crying happy tears. Doc Morrison clapped Cole on the shoulder. The children clustered around, hugging their mother, shaking Cole's hand, grinning with relief and excitement. They were a family now, legal and binding and real. But as they left the church, walking out into the cold sunshine, Maggie saw a figure standing across the street. A man in a fine black coat, tall and broad-shouldered, with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. Silas. Her brother had arrived early, and from the look on his face he knew exactly what they had just done. Standing beside him was another man, thinner and sharp-featured, carrying a leather case. A lawyer. Maggie's hand tightened on Cole's arm. He followed her gaze and saw them too. "So that is your brother," he said quietly. "Yes, and his lawyer." Silas smiled, a thin, cold expression without warmth, and crossed the street toward them. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "Well, sister," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "I see you have been busy." "Silas," Maggie said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "What are you doing here? I told you in my letter. I have come to assess the situation regarding your children. And I must say what I have found is deeply troubling." The lawyer stepped forward, opening his case. "Mrs. Brennan, or should I say, Mrs. Hartford, I am Howard Blackwood, legal counsel for Mr. Silas Brennan. I have here a writ from the Kansas District Court granting my client temporary guardianship of your 6 minor children, pending a full hearing on your fitness as a mother." Cole stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Maggie. "That paper does not mean anything in Wyoming without approval from a territorial judge." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Already obtained, Mr. Hartford. Judge Samuel Worthington has agreed to hear the case in 3 days. Until then, the children will be housed in neutral custody." "No," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "You cannot take them." "I'm afraid we can," Blackwood said. "And we will. Mrs. Adelaide Hutchins has generously offered to house them at her hotel until the hearing." "Over my dead body," Cole said, his voice low and dangerous. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, his face troubled. "Cole, I am sorry, but if the judge signed off on this, I got to enforce it." "Tom," Cole said, turning to the sheriff, "you know me. You know I would not let harm come to these children." "I know that," the sheriff said, "but the law is the law. If you resist, I will have to arrest you, and that will not help nobody." Maggie felt the world tilting beneath her feet. This could not be happening, not now, not after finally finding safety. Thomas pushed through the adults, his face fierce. "You cannot take us," he said to Silas. "We are not going with you." Silas looked down at the boy with contempt. "What you want does not matter, child. The law decides what is best for you, not your feelings." Cole knelt down, put his hands on Thomas's shoulders. "Son," he said quietly, "I need you to be strong right now. I need you to go with your brothers and sisters. Keep them calm. Keep them safe. Can you do that?" Thomas's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. "Are you giving up?" "Never," Cole said fiercely. "This is just 3 days. 3 days, and then you are coming home. I promise you." He stood and faced Silas. "You touch one hair on any of those children's heads, and territorial law or not, you will answer to me." Silas smiled. "Such threats, Mr. Hartford. And in front of a sheriff, too." He turned to Blackwood. "Note that down. Evidence of a violent temperament." A wagon rolled up, driven by a stern-faced woman who could only be Mrs. Adelaide Hutchins. She looked at Maggie with cold disapproval, at the children with barely concealed disdain. "Come along, children," she said. "Let us get you somewhere proper." The next few minutes were agony. Maggie hugged each child, whispering assurances she did not believe, making promises she was not sure she could keep. Catherine sobbed against her shoulder. The twins clung to her skirts. Little Patrick screamed and had to be carried to the wagon. Baby William cried with the piercing wail of an infant who senses his mother's distress. Thomas was the last to go. He stood straight and dry-eyed, trying to be brave, trying to be the man Cole had been teaching him to be. But his voice broke when he spoke. "Do not let them take us forever," he said. "Please." "Never," Maggie whispered. "We will get you back. I swear it." Then he climbed into the wagon with his siblings, and Mrs. Hutchins drove them away. Maggie watched until they disappeared around the corner, then collapsed against Cole, silent sobs shaking her body. Cole held her, his own face twisted with rage and grief. Around them, the small group of witnesses stood in shocked silence. "This is wrong," Mrs. Cooper said fiercely. "Those children belong with their mother." "Law does not always care about right," Doc Morrison said quietly. "Sometimes it just cares about rules." Cole looked at Pastor Stone. "We need help, legal help, someone who knows the law better than that snake Blackwood." Stone nodded slowly. "There is someone, Judge Worthington himself. He is strict, but he is fair. If we can present the right case, show the children are thriving under your care, Show that Silas's motives are not pure. We might have a chance. Then that is what we will do, Cole said. He looked down at Maggie. We are going to get them back, all of them. I promise you. Maggie nodded, but inside she felt hollow. She had trusted before, had believed in promises, and she had learned that sometimes, no matter how hard you fight, you lose anyway. But this time she was not fighting alone. This time she had Cole beside her, steady and determined. This time, maybe, just maybe, things would be different. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Pastor Stone helped them gather character witnesses. Doc Morrison agreed to testify about the children's improved health. Mrs. Cooper would speak to Maggie's character. They gathered records of Cole's land ownership, his military service, his standing in the community. And Maggie remembered the letter, the one her father had sent before he died, warning her about Silas, about his gambling debts, about his desperation for money. She had kept it, stored in the bottom of her trunk with the few things she had salvaged from her old life. She showed it to Cole, watched his face harden as he read the accusations, the warnings, the explicit instruction that the land should never go to Silas under any circumstances. This is it, Cole said. This proves his motive. He is not here for the children. He is here for the money. But will it be enough, Maggie asked. Cole folded the letter carefully. It has to be, because losing is not an option. On the morning of the hearing, they dressed in their best clothes and walked to the courthouse with their small group of supporters. The building was modest, just a large room with a judge's bench, a few rows of seats, and a pot-bellied stove that did little to warm the space. Judge Samuel Worthington was already seated, a man of 68 with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He looked stern and forbidding, and Maggie felt her courage falter. But Cole took her hand, squeezed it gently, and led her to their seats. Across the aisle, Silas sat with Howard Blackwood, both of them looking confident and smug. Behind them, Mrs. Hutchins watched with pursed lips and disapproving eyes. And in the front row, separated from their mother by law and custom and cruel circumstance, sat Maggie's 6 children. Thomas held baby William. Catherine had her arms around the twins. Little Patrick sat on his brother's lap, thumb in mouth, eyes wide and frightened. Maggie met Thomas's gaze across the space and saw her own fear reflected back. But she also saw determination. Her son believed they would win, believed Cole would make it right. She could not let him down, could not let any of them down. Judge Worthington banged his gavel, and the hearing began. The battle for Maggie's children and for the future they all hoped to build was about to unfold. The courtroom was cold in more ways than one. The pot-bellied stove in the corner struggled against the winter chill, seeping through every crack in the walls. But it was the atmosphere that truly froze the blood. Judge Samuel Worthington sat elevated behind his bench like an Old Testament prophet, his face carved from granite, his eyes revealing nothing. The 12 members of the jury, 10 men and 2 women, all locals from Thunder Ridge and the surrounding ranches, sat along one wall, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to openly hostile toward the proceedings. Maggie sat beside Cole at a table that wobbled slightly whenever anyone leaned on it. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across the narrow aisle, Silas Brennan lounged in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. His lawyer, Howard Blackwood, shuffled papers with the practiced movements of someone who had done this 100 times before. And in the front row, under the watchful eye of Mrs. Adelaide Hutchins, sat the children. Thomas held baby William with the fierce protectiveness of a soldier guarding precious cargo. Catherine had her arms around the twins, James and John, who for once sat completely still, sensing the gravity of the moment. Little Patrick sucked his thumb, his eyes darting between his mother and the imposing figure of the judge. Judge Worthington banged his gavel once, sharp as a gunshot. This court is now in session. We are here to determine the matter of custody for 6 minor children, currently under the temporary guardianship of Mr. Silas Brennan of Kansas City, but claimed by their mother, Mrs. Margaret Hartford, and her husband, Mr. Jacob Hartford, of this territory. He looked over his spectacles at both parties. Mr. Blackwood, as petitioner, you may present your case. Blackwood stood, smoothing his vest, and faced the jury with the confidence of a man accustomed to winning. Gentlemen, ladies of the jury, This case is remarkably simple despite attempts to complicate it. Mrs. Margaret Brennan, now calling herself Mrs. Hartford, abandoned her legal residence in Kansas, taking 6 minor children without notice to any authority. She then cohabited with a stranger, Mr. Hartford, for over 4 weeks before entering into what can only be called a marriage of convenience, rushed through to avoid the legal consequences of her actions. He paused, letting his words settle. Under the revised statutes of Kansas, 1879, Section 23-103, a mother who abandons her legal domicile and exposes her children to immoral conditions can be deemed unfit. Mr. Silas Brennan, as the children's uncle and closest living male relative, has both the right and the responsibility to intervene. Blackwood gestured towards Silas. My client is a respected bank officer in Kansas City, a man of means and moral standing, who can provide these children with proper education, proper housing, and proper supervision. Can the same be said of a woman who fled her home in the dead of night and moved in with a bachelor rancher she had never met? Maggie felt Cole's hand find hers under the table, warm and steady. She held on like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. Judge Worthington leaned forward. Mr. Blackwood, you mentioned abandonment of legal domicile. Was Mrs. Brennan, as she was then, under any legal restriction that prevented her from leaving Kansas? Blackwood hesitated for just a fraction. Well, no, Your Honor, but the manner of her departure. Was she fleeing criminal charges? No, Your Honor. Was she in violation of any court order? No, but then she was free to relocate as she saw fit, was she not? Technically, yes, but the circumstances suggest, noted. Continue. Blackwood's confident expression had developed a crack. He called his first witness. Mrs. Adelaide Hutchins, if you please. The stern woman took the stand, smoothed her skirts, and fixed Maggie with a look of pure contempt. She swore her oath on a worn Bible that had seen countless such promises. Mrs. Hutchins, Blackwood began, you have been housing the children for the past 3 days. Can you describe their condition when they arrived? Mrs. Hutchins sniffed. They were in a deplorable state, Mr. Blackwood. Their clothing was ragged and ill-fitting, clearly hand-me-downs or worse. Several had no proper shoes. The youngest was suffering from what appeared to be malnutrition. And their behavior, she shook her head. They were frightened and withdrawn, clearly traumatized by their experiences. And what experiences would those be? Living in sin with a strange man, of course. The oldest boy, Thomas, actually told me they had been staying at Mr. Hartford's ranch for weeks before any marriage took place. Weeks, Mr. Blackwood. 6 impressionable children exposed to immoral cohabitation. Cole half rose from his seat, but Pastor Stone, sitting directly behind them, put a restraining hand on his shoulder. No further questions, Blackwood said, returning to his seat with a satisfied smile. Judge Worthington looked at Cole. Mr. Hartford, do you wish to cross-examine? Cole stood slowly. He had no legal training, no experience with courtroom procedure, but he had something more important. He had the truth, and he had lived with those children long enough to know exactly what questions to ask. Mrs. Hutchins, he said, his voice steady, you said the children were frightened. Frightened of what? Mrs. Hutchins blinked. Well, of the situation, obviously. But specifically, what were they frightened of? Were they frightened of me? I assume, you assume. But did any of them actually express fear of me? Did they say I had harmed them or threatened them in any way? Mrs. Hutchins shifted uncomfortably. Not in so many words, but did they cry for me? Did they ask when they could go home to the ranch? Her silence was answer enough. Cole pressed on. You mentioned their clothing was ragged. Are you aware that when Mrs. Hartford and her children arrived at my ranch, they had been living in a collapsed cabin with a dead husband and father lying unburied in the yard because the ground was too frozen to dig? That they had walked 2 miles through a blizzard and would have died if they had not found shelter? No, I was not aware of the specific circumstances. So perhaps their ragged clothing had more to do with poverty and hardship than with any failing on their mother's part. Objection, Blackwood said, rising, leading the witness. Sustained, Judge Worthington said, but I will allow some latitude given Mr. Hartford is representing himself. Cole nodded. One more question, Mrs. Hutchins. In the 3 days the children were in your care, did you actually speak with them about their experiences? Did you ask Thomas why he was not afraid of me? Did you ask Catherine if she felt unsafe? Mrs. Hutchins' face reddened. I did not think it appropriate to question children about such matters. So your testimony about their fear and trauma is based entirely on your own assumptions, not on anything the children actually said or did. That is not, it was obvious. No further questions, Cole said, and sat down. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Worthington gavelled for silence. Mr. Blackwood, your next witness. Blackwood stood, looking less confident now. I call Mr. Vernon Pike. An older man shuffled to the stand, a neighbor from Kansas who had known Patrick Brennan. He swore his oath and settled into the witness chair with obvious discomfort. Mr. Pike, Blackwood said, you knew the deceased, Patrick Brennan? I did. Lived 2 farms over for near about 8 years. And what manner of man was he? Pike shifted. He worked hard, tried to provide for his family. Did you ever witness Mr. Brennan being violent toward his wife? No, sir, I cannot say I did. So Mrs. Brennan's claims of abuse may have been exaggerated? Pike hesitated. I cannot speak to that, sir. I only saw what I saw, which was a hard-working man trying to support his family. I suppose so, yes. Blackwood smiled. No further questions. Cole stood for cross-examination. Mr. Pike, how often did you visit the Brennan home? Oh, not often. Maybe 3-4 times a year. And those visits were planned in advance? Generally, yes. Went over for harvest help, barn raising, that sort of thing. So you would have had notice you were coming and the Brennans would have known to expect you? I suppose so, Mr. Pike. In 8 years of being neighbors, did you ever stop by unannounced? Ever just drop in to borrow a tool or share news? Pike's face colored. No, Patrick was not the sort who welcomed unexpected visitors. Why was that? He liked his privacy, or perhaps he did not want people seeing what went on in his house when he had been drinking. Objection, Blackwood shouted. Speculation. Withdrawn, Cole said. Mr. Pike, did you know Patrick Brennan drank heavily? There was gossip, Pike admitted reluctantly. Did you ever see evidence of this drinking? Empty bottles, perhaps? Or witness him intoxicated? Pike was silent for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. A few times I saw him in town, clearly the worse for drink. And yet you testified he was a hardworking man who provided for his family. Can both things be true? I suppose a man can have his failings and still. Can those failings include violence against his wife and children? I do not know. I never saw it. Because you were never there when it happened, Cole said quietly. No further questions. The morning wore on. Blackwood called 2 more witnesses, both character witnesses for Silas, both painting him as a respectable businessman concerned for his sister's children. Cole's cross-examinations revealed that neither had children of their own, neither had actually spent any significant time with Silas outside of business contexts, and neither could speak to his actual fitness as a guardian. By midday, Judge Worthington called for a recess. The jury filed out, the spectators stood and stretched, and Maggie finally released Cole's hand, flexing her fingers to restore circulation. You are doing well, Pastor Stone said quietly, leaning forward. You have planted doubt in their testimony. Doubt is not enough, Cole said grimly. We need to prove Silas is lying about his motives. Then it is time to play our hand, Stone replied. After the recess, Cole called his first witness. Thomas Brennan, he said clearly. A gasp went through the courtroom. Children rarely testified, and when they did, it was generally not given much weight. But Judge Worthington nodded slowly. The boy is old enough to understand an oath. Bring him forward. Thomas stood on shaking legs and walked to the witness stand. He looked impossibly small, sitting in the chair built for adults, his feet barely touching the floor. But when he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, his voice was steady. Cole approached gently. Thomas, I know this is frightening, but I need you to tell the judge and jury the truth about your life in Kansas. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Tell them about your father, about Patrick Brennan. Thomas looked down at his hands. My pa, he drank. Every night, mostly. And when he drank, he got mean. How did he get mean? Thomas's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He hit Ma. Hit her a lot. and sometimes he hit me too if I tried to stop him. The courtroom was utterly silent now. Even Silas had stopped smiling. "Thomas," Cole said gently, "can you show the court your back?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. He stood and turned around, began unbuttoning his shirt. When he pulled it down off his shoulders, the entire courtroom could see the scars. Old welts, some faded to white lines, others still pink and raised. The unmistakable pattern of a belt buckle. One of the women on the jury put her hand over her mouth. Several men shifted uncomfortably. "Thank you, Thomas," Cole said quietly. "You can fix your shirt. Just one more question. Are you afraid of me?" Thomas turned, and his face broke into a smile despite his tears. "No, sir. You taught me things Pa never did. How to work with my hands, how to care for animals, how to be a man without using my fists. You never raised your voice to me, not once, even when I messed up." He looked at the jury. "If I got to choose, I would choose him to be my Pa. Every time." Cole had to clear his throat before he could speak. No further questions. Blackwood stood for cross-examination, but for once he seemed unsure. "Thomas," he began, "these scars, how do we know they came from your father and not from some accident?" Thomas looked at him with eyes far too old for his face. "Because I remember every single time he gave them to me." Blackwood faltered. No further questions. Cole called his remaining witnesses in quick succession. Doc Morrison testified that all 6 children had arrived at the Hartford Ranch showing signs of neglect and potential abuse, but had thrived under Cole and Maggie's care. They had gained weight, their injuries had healed, and they showed none of the behavioral problems typical of children in ongoing distress. Mrs. Cooper testified to Maggie's character, describing her as a kind and devoted mother who had done everything possible to protect her children in an impossible situation. She also testified to Cole's character, describing him as one of the most honest and hardworking men in the territory, someone who had earned universal respect. Pastor Stone testified to having performed the marriage ceremony, and to his belief that it was entered into in good faith, not as a legal maneuver, but as a genuine commitment between 2 people who had found companionship and shared hardship. Then Cole stood and faced the judge. "Your Honor, I have one more piece of evidence. With your permission, I would like Mrs. Hartford to read a letter into the record." Blackwood jumped up. "Objection. We have not seen this letter. We have not had time to verify its authenticity." Judge Worthington held out his hand. "Let me see it." Cole handed over the yellowed paper. The judge read it carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Silas. "Mr. Brennan, this letter purports to be from your father, Edmund Brennan, dated June 15, 1881. Is this your father's handwriting?" Silas went pale. I would have to examine it more closely." "Approach the bench." Silas stood on unsteady legs and took the letter. His hands shook slightly as he read it. When he looked up, his face had gone from pale to red. "Well," the judge asked. It appears to be his handwriting," Silas admitted. "Then I will allow it into evidence. Mrs. Hartford, please read the relevant portions." Maggie stood, took the letter with trembling hands, and began to read. Her voice shook at first, then grew stronger. "Dear Margaret, I am writing this because I fear my time is short, and there are things you must know. Your brother Silas has fallen into deep trouble. He owes $10,000 in gambling debts to some very dangerous men in Kansas City. He has come to me twice begging for money, and twice I have refused. The land I am leaving you, the 320 acres by the river, has been surveyed. There is silver there, perhaps a great deal of it. The surveyors estimate it could be worth $50,000 or more. I am leaving this land to you, not to Silas, because I know you will use it to provide for your children. Silas would gamble it away within a year. But Margaret, you must be careful. Your brother is desperate, and desperate men do terrible things. If anything used to happen to me, if I should die suddenly or under suspicious circumstances, know that Silas likely had a hand in it. Do not trust him. Do not let him near your children. He does not love them. He only loves money. Protect yourself and your little ones. Your loving father, Edmund Brennan." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Every eye turned to Silas, whose face had gone through several shades of red before settling on a sickly gray. Judge Worthington leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, do you wish to respond to these accusations?" Silas stood, but his usual confidence had evaporated. That letter is, my father was elderly. He was not in his right mind. Was he diagnosed with any mental incapacity? The judge asked sharply. Well, no, but did he have a history of confusion or dementia? No, Your Honor, but you must understand I was going through a difficult time. I made some poor choices, but that does not mean what, Mr. Brennan? That you are here for the money rather than the children? I care about my nieces and nephews, enough to pay off your gambling debts with their inheritance. Silas sank back into his chair, the fight gone out of him. Judge Worthington turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard testimony from both sides. You have seen evidence of abuse in the children's former home. You have heard testimony about their improved condition under the care of Mr. and Mrs. Hartford. You have seen a letter suggesting that Mr. Silas Brennan's motives are financial rather than altruistic. You must now deliberate and decide what is in the best interests of these 6 children. The jury filed out. The waiting began. 2 hours passed. Maggie sat motionless, barely breathing. Cole held her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. Thomas kept his eyes fixed on the jury room door, willing it to open. The other children had been taken back to their temporary lodgings, but Thomas had been allowed to stay, and he was not about to leave. When the jury finally returned, their faces gave nothing away. They filed into their seats, and the foreman, a grizzled rancher named John McClintock, stood. Judge Worthington banged his gavel. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. In the matter of custody of the 6 minor children of Margaret Hartford, how do you find? McClintock looked directly at Maggie, and for the first time, his stern face softened slightly. We find that the children should remain in the custody of Mr. and Mrs. Jacob Hartford. The courtroom erupted. Maggie let out a sound between a sigh and a laugh, collapsing against Cole. Thomas jumped from his seat with a whoop of joy. Pastor Stone clasped his hands in prayer. Mrs. Cooper openly wept. Order, Judge Worthington shouted, banging his gavel repeatedly. Order in this court. When the noise subsided, he continued. The jury has spoken, and I concur with their decision. It is clear to this court that while Mrs. Hartford's previous circumstances were difficult, she took the steps necessary to protect her children when the opportunity arose. Her marriage to Mr. Hartford appears to be genuine and entered into in good faith. The children are thriving under their care. Most significantly, Mr. Silas Brennan's motives for seeking custody have been shown to be primarily financial, rather than based on genuine concern for the children's welfare. He fixed Silas with a hard stare. Furthermore, Mr. Brennan, I am disturbed by the implications in your father's letter. While this court does not have jurisdiction over matters in Kansas, I will be forwarding a copy of this letter to the appropriate authorities there. If your father's death was indeed suspicious, that is a matter for criminal investigation. Silas went white. Your Honor, I had nothing to do with... This court is adjourned, Judge Worthington said, bringing down his gavel with finality. The children are to be returned to Mr. and Mrs. Hartford immediately. Maggie could not move, could not speak. Cole lifted her to her feet, and she turned to him, saw tears streaming down his face, and realized her own face was wet as well. Thomas crashed into them, wrapping his arms around both adults, and they stood there in the middle of the courtroom, a knot of relief and joy so intense it hurt. They went directly from the courthouse to Mrs. Hutchins' hotel, Cole driving the wagon with Maggie beside him, her hands gripping the seat so tightly her knuckles were white. When they arrived, Mrs. Hutchins opened the door with a face like thunder, but before she could speak, the children came running. Catherine reached Maggie first, crashing into her mother with such force they both nearly fell. Then came the twins, then little Patrick. All of them talking at once, crying, laughing, clinging to her skirts and her arms and anywhere they could reach. Thomas stood back, holding baby William, his eyes wet but his face serious. When Maggie opened her arms to him, he came, and she held all of them at once, impossibly, her arms not large enough but trying anyway. I knew you would come, Thomas whispered against her shoulder. I told them you would. Always, Maggie said, her voice breaking. Always, always, always. Within 10 minutes, all 6 children were gathered in the Hartford wagon. Mrs. Hutchins had handed them over with barely concealed fury, but the law was the law, and she had no choice. Catherine hugged her mother and would not let go. The twins chattered excitedly. Little Patrick fell asleep in Maggie's arms, exhausted by the emotional upheaval. Baby William cooed contentedly. As they rode out of Thunder Ridge, Maggie looked back once and saw Silas standing in the street, watching them go. His face was a mask of impotent rage. She felt a moment of pity for him, for the path he had chosen, the desperation that had led him to try to steal children for money. But the pity was brief. He had made his choices. Now he would live with them. The ride home was filled with laughter and chatter. Thomas sat on the bench beside Cole, and Maggie heard her son telling Cole about everything that had happened in the 3 days they had been apart. Cole listened with genuine interest, asking questions, making Thomas feel heard and valued. In the back of the wagon, Catherine organized the younger children like a general marshaling troops, making sure everyone was warm enough, tucked in enough, happy enough. She had her mother's strength, Maggie realized. Whatever came next, Catherine would be all right. When they finally crested the ridge and saw the Hartford Ranch spread out below, smoke rising from the chimney that Cole had left banked that morning, every single one of them felt it. Home. They were home. The next weeks flowed into a rhythm even more settled than before. With the threat of Silas gone, with their family legally recognized, the tension that had underlain everything melted away. The children blossomed. Thomas spent every free moment with Cole, learning everything the older man could teach him. Catherine discovered a love of cooking and began experimenting with recipes. Some successful, some decidedly not, but all met with encouraging words. The twins, James and John, became Cole's shadows, following him everywhere, mimicking his walk, his mannerisms, even his thoughtful silences. Little Patrick's health continued to improve, and his personality, previously hidden beneath fear and illness, emerged as boisterous and joyful. Baby William grew stronger each day, hitting all the milestones Maggie had feared he might never reach. And Maggie herself changed. The pinched, frightened look faded from her face. She smiled more, laughed even. She began to sleep through the night without nightmares, began to accept that she was safe, truly safe, for the first time in over a decade. Her relationship with Cole deepened. They talked long into the night, sharing stories, dreams, fears. They worked side by side during the day, falling into an easy partnership. And slowly, carefully, they began to explore the physical aspect of their relationship. A kiss that lingered a moment longer, a touch that meant more than simple contact. The gradual awakening of desire that neither had expected, but both welcomed. 6 weeks after the trial, on a cold, late February morning, Maggie woke early and knew immediately that something was different. She lay still, taking inventory of her body, and realized with a jolt what it meant. She was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with a complicated mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, but also fear. Her pregnancies with Patrick had been marked by violence and stress. But this was different. This child had been conceived in safety, in growing love, in a home filled with warmth. She waited until the children were occupied before telling Cole. They were in the barn checking on a mare that was due to foal soon, when she finally found the courage to speak. "Cole, I need to tell you something." He looked up from examining the mare's belly, saw something in her face that made him set down his tools and give her his full attention. "What is it?" "I am with child." Cole went very still. Then slowly his face transformed. Joy dawned in his eyes, pure and uncomplicated. "Maggie, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be. Maybe 6 weeks along." He crossed to her in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Maggie laughed, startled by his exuberance, and when he set her down, he kissed her, really kissed her, for the first time since their wedding, and it was everything a kiss should be, tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Maggie asked, needing to hear it. "Happier than I have any right to be." He pulled back to look at her. "You have given me everything, Maggie. A family, a purpose, and now this. I do not deserve it." "Yes, you do," Maggie said fiercely. "You deserve all of it and more." That night at dinner, they told the children. The response was everything they could have hoped for. Thomas looked proud, as if he had personally accomplished something impressive. Catherine immediately began planning what the baby would need. The twins demanded to know if it would be a boy or girl, so they would know whether to teach it to climb trees or, after a moment's thought, decided that either way, they would teach it to climb trees. Little Patrick wanted to know if the baby would play with him. Baby William, now 12 months old and just beginning to toddle, simply banged his spoon on the table and laughed. It was perfect. The spring came slowly, reluctantly, as if winter did not want to release its grip. But eventually the snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. Cole and Thomas began preparing the fields for planting. Maggie, her belly just beginning to show, planted a garden. The children ran wild in the warming sun, their laughter echoing across the land. One evening in late April, Maggie stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Cole came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her, rested his hands on her belly. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what? About names? If it is a girl, I would like to name her Grace." Maggie leaned back against him. "Grace. Why Grace? Because that is what all of this has been. Grace. Undeserved favor, blessings we did not earn but received anyway. You and the children stumbling into my life was grace. This baby is grace." He paused. "And maybe, just maybe, we can give grace to others the way it was given to us." Maggie turned in his arms to face him. "You are a good man, Jacob Hartford." "I am trying to be," he said. "Every day, I am trying to be my own." They stood there as the sun set, two people who had been broken, finding themselves remade, not into what they had been before, but into something new and stronger. The baby was born in September, on a morning when the air held the first hint of autumn coolness. Doc Morrison attended, along with Mrs. Cooper, and the birth was quick and uncomplicated. When the baby let out her first wail, strong and healthy, Maggie wept with relief. "A girl," Doc Morrison announced, placing the baby on Maggie's chest. "A beautiful girl." "Grace," Maggie whispered. "Grace Emma Hartford." Cole, who had been pacing outside, burst through the door at the sound of the baby's cry. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Maggie, exhausted but glowing. The baby, tiny and perfect, already rooting for her first meal. Mrs. Cooper beaming. Doc Morrison looking satisfied. "Come meet your daughter," Maggie said softly. Cole approached slowly, as if afraid he might break the spell. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. Grace opened her eyes, unfocused but already curious, and seemed to look right at him. "Hello, little one," Cole whispered. "Welcome home." He reached out one finger, and Grace wrapped her tiny hand around it with surprising strength. In that moment, Cole felt something shift in his chest, some final piece of his broken heart sliding back into place. This was his daughter. Not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the grace that had brought them all together. Over the next months, the Hartford household adjusted to the presence of a newborn. Thomas, now 12 and shooting up in height, was surprisingly gentle with his baby sister. Catherine, at 10, became a second mother, always ready to help. The twins, at 8, were fascinated by every tiny sound and movement Grace made. Little Patrick, now 4, would sit and stare at her for long periods, occasionally patting her head with careful reverence. And William, at 17 months, seemed to understand that this was his sister too, would bring her his favorite toys as offerings. Maggie watched her children with a heart so full it felt like it might burst. She had 7 children now. 7 reasons to wake up grateful every morning. 7 lives that had been saved, were being shaped, would go on to shape others. Winter came again, but this time they were ready. The barn was stocked with hay and grain. The root cellar was full of preserved food. The house was tight and warm. And most importantly, they faced it together. One evening, with snow falling softly outside, the entire family gathered around the fire. Cole held Grace, rocking her gently as she drowsed. Thomas was reading aloud from a new book Pastor Stone had given him. Catherine was teaching the twins to knit. Little Patrick was building towers with wooden blocks Cole had carved. William was asleep in Maggie's lap. Maggie looked around at this scene, this beautiful, ordinary, miraculous scene, and felt tears prick her eyes. A year and a half ago, she had been kneeling in the snow, ready to die, seeing no future beyond the next frozen hour. And now she had this, had love and safety and hope. had children who laughed instead of cowered, had a husband who showed her every day what partnership truly meant. Cole looked up from the baby and caught her eye. He smiled and she smiled back. And in that exchange was everything. Gratitude for the past, contentment with the present, hope for the future. That night, after the children were all asleep, Maggie and Cole stood together at the window, looking out at the snow-covered land. Cole's arm was around her shoulders. Her head rested against his chest. They stood in comfortable silence, comfortable with each other, comfortable in their life. "Do you ever think about that day?" Maggie asked softly. "The day you found us?" "Every day," Cole said. "Every single day I thank God I did not ride past." "I thank him too," Maggie said. "And I thank you." Cole kissed the top of her head. "We saved each other," he said. "That is what family does." And they stood there as the snow fell, as the fire burned warm behind them, as their children slept safe and sound, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The years that followed were not without hardship. There were droughts and early frosts. There were illnesses and injuries. There were the normal trials of raising children, the arguments and rebellions and heartbreaks that come with guiding young people into adulthood. But through it all, the Hartford family stood firm. They had learned what truly mattered. They had learned that love was a choice made every day. That family was not just blood, but commitment. That home was not a place, but a feeling of safety and belonging. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch work. Catherine became a teacher, following in her mother's footsteps. The twins, inseparable as ever, both became skilled craftsmen. Patrick found his calling as a veterinarian. William, who barely remembered life before the Hartford ranch, grew up believing Cole had always been his father. And Grace, the child of the second chance, grew up knowing she was the seal on a covenant, the visible sign of grace made manifest. In the summer of 1920, 42 years after that frozen December day, an elderly Cole sat on the porch of the Hartford ranch. At 79, he was still strong, still active, but he felt his years. Beside him sat Thomas, now 54, himself a grandfather. "Tell me again, Grandpa Cole," said a small voice. A great-granddaughter, 8 years old, climbed into his lap. "Tell me about the day you found Grandma Maggie." Cole looked out over the land that had been his life's work, saw the buildings and fences and fields that represented decades of labor. He saw Thomas's house down the hill, Catherine's house beyond that, saw his grandchildren and great-grandchildren scattered across the property, all of them carrying forward the legacy that had begun with an act of simple compassion on a frozen winter day. "It was the coldest day I ever lived through," he began, his voice still strong despite his age. "The sky was heavy with snow, and I was just trying to get home. But then I saw something, someone that made me stop." He told the story as he had told it dozens of times before to children and grandchildren, to neighbors and visitors. He told it not because he wanted glory, but because he wanted them to understand. Wanted them to know that a single choice, a single moment of choosing compassion over convenience, could change everything. When he finished, the little girl looked up at him with wise eyes. "So you saved them." Cole shook his head gently. "No, sweetheart, we saved each other. That is what love does. It saves us all." The child nodded, satisfied, and ran off to play. Cole watched her go, this great-granddaughter who existed only because he had chosen not to ride past that day. He thought about Maggie, gone now for 5 years, but still present in every corner of this ranch, in the faces of her descendants, in the values they carried forward. She had given him 7 children. Those 7 had given him 23 grandchildren. Those 23 had already begun producing great-grandchildren. From that one frozen day, from that one act of stopping instead of riding past, had come this entire legacy. Thomas put a hand on his father's shoulder. The old man had never called him stepfather. Never would. "Pa," he said softly, "Ma would be proud of what we have built here." Cole covered Thomas's hand with his own. "We built it together, son. All of us. That is what family does." As the sun set over the Wyoming landscape, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Cole closed his eyes and felt at peace. He had been given more than he deserved, more than he had dreamed possible. He had been given grace, and he had tried to pass it on. Had tried to teach his children and grandchildren That when you see someone in need, you stop, you help, you open your door and your heart, because you never know when that stranger in the snow might become your family, might become your salvation, might become the best thing that ever happened to you. The frozen ground that had nearly claimed Maggie and her children had instead become the foundation for something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure long after Cole himself was gone. And as he sat there on his porch, surrounded by the fruits of that long-ago choice, Jacob Hartford knew with absolute certainty that he had lived a good life, a life marked by love and service, and the steady, quiet work of building something that mattered. He had been a soldier once, fighting for a cause he believed in. But the most important battle he had ever fought was the one to give 7 children a home. And unlike the war, unlike so many battles, this one had been won. The sun dipped below the horizon, the stars came out bright and cold and beautiful. And in the warm house behind him, the laughter of family echoed, carrying forward the legacy of grace that had begun on a frozen December day 4 decades before. Grace upon grace upon grace. That was the Hartford way. That was the lesson Cole hoped would outlast even stone and steel. Help when you can, love when you are able, build something that will endure, and always, always stop for the stranger in the snow, because you never know who might be carrying your future in their arms.